Start the recording. Um, and we're going to talk today about Lalita. She's sometimes called Lalita, sometimes Tripura Sundari, sometimes she's called Raja Rajeshwari or Kameshwari. She's got all kinds of names. And I highly recommend this one song. You can get it on Spotify. There's a whole album, and where is it? It's called the Lalita Ashtot. Is that the one? Hang on, let me go to album. So Lalita Ashtotram by Craig Pruis and Ananda is the 1,000 names of the goddess, and it is the most beautiful. It's 40 minutes long. And if you teach yin, or if you want to just put something on that'll transport you to another world, I'll show this to you. It looks like that. I don't know if you can see that. The album is Mother Divine, and it's Lalita with a THA at the end. Lalita Ashtotram by Craig Pruis and Nanda, and it goes through the 1,000 names. So this is something that she's kind of famous for, is having these 1,000 names. One just more beautiful than the next, and beauty. And she's also really all about beauty. There is some background noise, so I'm going to do the mute, but please unmute yourself, and really, please, 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 at any point, because I love hearing what you all have to say. And I think you're all, like most of you, a lot of you know just as much about this stuff as I do, which is really cool. I told my neighbor, she was seeing me studying the other day, and I was like, well, these people are keeping me on my toes. I gotta study this is my college thesis. So I've been studying my butt off. Refreshing. But so Lalita is, oh, actually, you know what? I'm going to back up, because before we do that, I wanted to go back to last week and the last couple of weeks. And I was looking at, more people coming in. I had just by chance looked at this Rumi poem. It was right above a poem that I was looking for yesterday. And I thought, wow, if this isn't everything we've been talking about lately. So this is just part of it. It's a longer poem. But he says, learn from this eagle story that when misfortune comes, you must quickly praise. Right? Remember Dhumavati, the goddess of disappointment? When misfortune comes, you must quickly praise. Others may be saying, oh no, but you will be opening out like a rose losing itself petal by petal. Someone once asked a great sheikh what Sufism was. The feeling of joy when sudden disappointment comes. The feeling of joy when sudden disappointment comes. The eagle carries off Muhammad's boot and saves him from a snake bite. Don't grieve for what doesn't come. Some things that don't happen keep disasters from happening. Isn't that amazing? I was like, whoa, that's everything we've been saying. The feeling of joy when sudden disappointment comes. You know, one of my friends said, she described it as a cosmic giggle. Do you know, have you ever been around people like that? They're your people when things shit can totally hit the fan and things fall apart, and you can look at each other and smile and giggle. That's how you know you're with the right people. They can do the cosmic giggle. So that was one thing. And then I found one other thing by Parker Palmer, who's, I don't know how old he is, but I'm guessing he's in his 90s by now, maybe his late 80s. He's a poet and a philosopher. And this is what he wrote. When we so fear the dark that we demand light around the clock, then there can be only one result. Artificial light that's glaring and graceless. And beyond its borders, a darkness that grows ever more terrifying as we try to hold it off. Split off from each other, neither darkness nor light is fit for human habitation. But the moment we say yes to both of them and join their paradoxical dance, the two conspire to make us healthy and whole. Amazing, right? So I can send those to you. I can stick them I don't know. I'll put them somewhere. I'll post them on Instagram today so you can see them. But that I wanted to start with. My cat is tacking something behind me. And then one other thing, I know that last week somebody had mentioned the book. Yes, please, I will, Samantha. The book Shakti Rising. Did somebody say they loved that book, Shakti Rising, or recommend it? I think I recommended it too. When someone mentioned it, I was like, oh yeah, that book. It's this book. Don't buy it. It's a terrible book. Sorry. Samantha, do you like it? I forgot how much I dislike this book. So if you went and bought this book after last week, I'm sorry. You've only used a bit of it. Yeah, I went and dug it out today. And there's not a lot of stuff on these wild goddesses. It's really hard to find. And so this book came out last year. And I went and I was like looking through the whole Lalita section and looking through, and it doesn't make any sense, honestly. You don't know where she's going or what she's talking about. She's a lovely person. If you listen to her being interviewed, she's brilliant. Brilliant. The book is nonsense. So don't buy the book, okay? don't tell her I said that if you ever see her. So that's all the housekeeping stuff for this week. So let's get into the story. Let me get my notes. The story of, Samantha's laughing. I just don't want you to spend $20, on a book that's really not worth $20. But if you listen to podcasts, she was on the Embodied Philosophy podcast, Chitheads. And if you scroll back in Chitheads, it was last year, I think, maybe more, but she does an incredible talk about the Dasa Mahavidyas, these goddesses we're talking about. So that's free. Listen to that. It's so much better than the book. Okay. So the story of Lalita. Raise your hand if you're familiar with this goddess at all. Lalita Tripura Sundari. Cool, Maria. Yay. Awesome. I'm going to write the name of the podcast here in the chat. So it's called Chitheads. And her name is Kavita. I think I'm spelling it right, but maybe not. Chinayan. If you look, Kavita, yes, I did spell it right. So if you look that up in your podcast app, you'll find it, I think. And it's really super brilliant. So Lalita, her name, Lalita, it could mean one of two things, either soft or playful. And her full name is Lalita Tripura Sundari. How do I go back to speaker view? There we go. Okay. My cat never plays like this, and he's going insane right now. I'm sorry I'm taking your toy away. I'm so mean. I'm sorry, but you're making me crazy. So Tripura Sundari means the most beautiful one. Sundari, the most beautiful. In Tripura, in all three cities or all three worlds. And so she's the most beautiful in all three worlds, and she's soft and playful. And so that right there tells you so much about this goddess that is the marriage between queenliness and wildness. She's almost like, we've been talking about Kali, and we talked a little bit about Parvati, and Parvati is like the sort of good girl aspect of Shakti. She's like Shiva's doting wife, and Kali is like the forest dwelling, blood drinking wild one, right? And somehow Lalita manages to marry those two things, where she takes the holy wildness, the primal power of Kali, but also the queenliness, the stateliness, the generosity of Parvati, and she's all of that. So she's super amazing in that way. She dwells in the forest, just like a lot of these goddesses that we've covered. There's always something in the literature about all of these wild wisdom goddesses dwelling in the forest. So they're all outsiders, even the beautiful ones, even the terrifying ones. They're all sort of like edge dwellers. They say she has a body like pure crystal. And actually, when they talk about her body, it's kind of amazing. And I'll get to more about that later. But let me just tell you, she's got big breasts and big thighs and hair on her belly. So we love her for that. She's a word, I don't even want to say it because it's kind of like, but the best word to describe her is juicy. And it's not a word I really like generally use in regard to a human. It's better for like a peach, but that's really what she's like. Sometimes she wears a tiger skin, but more often a shimmering red and gold sari. She has a goad and a prod. She has a noose, and then she has a sugarcane bow with 5 flower arrows. And we'll talk more about what that means later. And I shared a picture of her on the Instagram where she looks like totally like the queen who rules the universe. And underneath her, Shiva is lying there. And so Shiva basically is her blanket that she sits on. And he's like in this state of total ecstasy, just looking at her like gaga eyed. And then underneath that is all the other gods, all the other male gods underneath her. They're basically like the legs that hold up her throne. And so you get it right away that this woman is in charge and nobody messes with her. Nobody. She never loses. She's all powerful. And what else about her? She's effervescent. I thought that was the best way to describe her quality. If there was one word, it's effervescent. It's irresistible and shimmering, and it's like she's like what she is the scent that the flowers give out to attract the bees. That's her. That's Lalita. So the story today, it's a bit of a longer story, so just stay with me. It's a great story though. It's one of my favorite stories. Do you have any questions or anything to say so far before we get into the big story? If you do, you can chat box it up or you can unmute and speak up. Okay, cool. So the story, we left last week with Dhumavati, right? Dhumavati, and if you weren't here last week, don't worry about it. Last week we were talking about the goddess of disappointment. Dhumavati, she's made from the smoke. So Shiva had his beloved wife Sati. And Sati got really mad at her father. This is a longer story, but she basically committed suicide and she stepped into a fire. And the fire, the smoke that came from that fire became the goddess Dhumavati. But then after that, Shiva was so distressed, he actually collected the body parts that remained in the fire. I mean, what an image that is, right? This man taking his wife's arms and legs from the fire, all burned, and holding them. And crying. I'm sure he was weeping, and he's holding what's left of his wife, and he just starts to walk. He just starts to walk all through India, and as he walks, the body parts, they fall. Here and there, one falls, a foot falls, a toe falls, and where those body parts fell are really holy places in India that you can still go and make pilgrimage to. And eventually, when all of her is gone and he's just so deep in his grief, he retreats. He goes to the mountains. He goes way, way, way up in the top of the Himalayas, and he meditates. He's like, okay, if life is painful, right? If this is life, if I'm going to have my heart broken like this, then I'm just going to be a yogi, right? Did you ever think that? Like, man, life is hard. I just want to be like those yogis who are just like peaceful all the time. And I just want to go live in a cave, like when your kid is screaming or when something, you get your heart broken. It's like, I don't want this. I want the yoga life. And so that's what he says. He's like, I'm just going to meditate and I'm just going to go and just be like an extreme ascetic. And so he does. And so he sits in meditation. And that's all he does. But you couldn't even say that it's meditation. It's more like he dwells in his grief. He just falls into the hole of his grief and his sorrow. And as he's doing this is the perfect time for a demon to come in, because we need Shiva, right? Shiva's the third part of the triad: creation, sustainment, destruction. When any part of that cycle is gone, the whole thing is off. The world doesn't work. And so everything is thrown into chaos when Shiva retreats, when he goes away and leaves the world. And so this one particular demon, Tarakasura is his name, he decides that this is his time to shine. And he happens to have, as is often the case, he has a magical boon from Brahma that only when he asks Brahma says, what would you like your boon to be? And this demon, he thinks he's really clever because he says, I want my boon to be that only the son of Shiva can kill me. Knowing that Shiva's wife is dead, he thinks he's really clever, right? Of course, Shiva doesn't have a son. He doesn't have a wife now. He's gone. So I'll be safe. And so he thinks he's totally, unstoppable. Now, meanwhile, they find out that Sati has been reincarnated and her name is now Parvati. And so they go and they get Parvati and they basically knock on Parvati's door. There's this little, I picture her like 18 years old. She's so beautiful. She's like beyond beautiful. And her whole life, all she's ever wanted was to marry Shiva. And like, even as a little girl, all the other girls would like play dolls and she would do puja and prayers to Shiva at like 4 years old. And so when the day comes and the gods knock on her door, her whole family is like, oh, all right. I guess you were right after all. You get to marry Shiva. And she's thinking like, I waited my whole life for this. This is everything I've ever wanted. He's so sexy. He's so amazing. He's so hot. I'm going to go get married to this man I've been dreaming about. And they take her to where Shiva is. And he's just like a shell, right? He's been meditating for so long. He's lost everything because he's so full of grief and darkness. The whole forest around him has withered. All the leaves have fallen off the trees. Everything is brown and dead and dry. And so at first she's like, oh man. But then she thinks, I love him. I love him no matter what. And so she just decides that she's going to take care of him. And so he's sitting there meditating. And she's like sweeping around him and she's filling up fresh water bowls next to him in case he opens his eyes and wants water. She puts fresh flowers in front of him. She does this day after day and she just loves him. Like she doesn't even care if he opens his eyes. That's unconditional love. Where usually it's like, somebody breathes wrong around me. I'm like, you don't love me right. We're like, I only love you if you do the dishes. Like we have all these conditions we put on love. He doesn't even have to open his eyes and she loves him like that. Like, can you imagine loving somebody that much that they don't even have to speak to you to get that kind of love from you? And so she's doing all this and she's just happy as can be. But the gods and goddesses are all like, we're on a clock here. You two need to make a baby because it's only your baby that's going to defeat this demon. So we got to speed this up. And so they go and they ask Kama. Kama is like the Cupid. I think we talked about him once before. Like the god of lust and desire and passion. And so they go tell Kama and his wife Rati, you got to come, speed the situation up. And so Kama fills the forest with the smells and the sounds of springtime. And he gets his sugarcane bow and his flower arrows. And he shoots the flower arrows, 5 of them, right into the heart of Shiva. 5 arrows, 5 senses. That's no coincidence. And so the 5 arrows go right to Shiva's heart. He opens his eyes, he's stunned. And in front of him is Parvati. And she's so beautiful. She's like a little lotus flower, all pink and gorgeous and lovely and shiny. And he feels the stirring of something inside him for the first time in a long time since Sati died. And then all of a sudden he gets so angry. He gets furious. He says, what? I can't be feeling that. My wife is dead and I'm a yogi and I don't want to feel that desire. I'm above that. I'm beyond that kind of desire. He gets so angry and he knows that Kama was the one who did this to him. So he looks around, he sees Kama. Shiva's third eye opens. You don't want to be anywhere around when Shiva's third eye opens. Flames pour out and he burns Kama until Kama is nothing but a pile of ashes. And his wife, Kama's wife, Rati, is crying, oh no, how could you do this? Parvati says, don't worry, I got this. So Shiva has this great way of making a bad situation worse a lot, which I also really feel like, oh, I get that. Yeah, haven't we all done that? And so Shiva, he's realized, oh my God, now it's even worse. And so he runs even further up the mountain into the woods. He is gone, right? And this pile of ashes now is at their feet. And Shiva's men, his sort of like, goons that he hangs out with, are standing around and Parvati is there. And the men start to take the ashes of Kama and they shape it. And pretty soon that shape takes the form of a man. And the man all of a sudden stands in front of them. And the man, as he stands in front of them, he chants a Shiva mantra. And that calls Shiva back quickly. And Shiva sees this man standing there chanting a mantra to him. And he says, Banda, Banda. Banda means good. And so this man becomes Banda. And eventually he becomes Banda Ashura, the Banda demon, right? And so Shiva thinks like, wow, this is pretty great. Look at this. He came from the ashes and he gives him this magical power. Don't know why he does this, but he gives him the power that anyone he comes up against, any adversary he faces, Banda immediately absorbs half of their power. So no one can defeat him, because as soon as he comes up against them, well, now the cat's got my lipstick. Oh. Mischievous today. So as soon as anyone tries to fight him, he immediately zaps half their power. And so he can always win. And so this demon now, because as of course, anyone with lots of power, often they get a big head about that, right? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Isn't that the saying? And so because he's got all this power, he thinks I can do anything. And he starts to just cause chaos and oppress the gods and the humans and everyone. And now there's an even bigger problem, right? And so the gods all get together and they're like, what do we do about this? How do we fix this? And the celestial sage, Narada is like this being who sort of rides in the clouds and plays an instrument and watches everything from above. And he'll often interject and say, here's what you should do. And so he yells down to the gods. He says, hey, here's what you have to do. You have to build a fire, and you have to do some prayers, some rituals, some sacrifices, some service, some chanting to Shakti, to the goddess. And you got to pray to the goddess and she'll come and help you. And he says the goddess never loses. In all these stories, right? Shiva does stupid things, Brahma does stupid things, all the gods do stupid things and they mess up. The goddess, Shakti, never. There's no story except maybe one where Sita, if you know the story of Sita, and she makes Ram chase after the golden deer. But that's a small thing. But other than that, there's no story where the goddess ever fails. And so they build this fire, but they have to build a fire on the top of a mountain. And so they have to lug all the things that they're bringing with them. All the gods and goddesses go, all the people go, and they have to trudge up this giant mountain. And the mountain in these stories is always symbolic. It's always, our own spiritual mountain, our own journey, our own path, our own spine. And so they've got to climb this mountain. By the time they get to the top, they're already exhausted. They think they have to build a fire too, but they do. And so they build a fire, they all pitch in, they make the biggest, most blazing, incredible fire anyone's ever seen. And they start putting things like ghee and flowers and rice and all kinds of things as offerings into this fire for the goddess. And they're chanting. They're chanting so long. They chant all through the night until it's pitch black, and they're chanting until their lips are cracking and they can barely get the words out. This goes on all night and just until about the morning time. And when they think, I can't do this anymore. What? This is ridiculous. It's not happening. Nothing's coming to save us. I want to give up. And just as they're about to give up, the light starts to break and out of the fire steps this goddess. And she is so incredible. So she's red. They say she even has red teeth, red like passion, red like blood. We've been talking in these stories about how all these goddesses sort of teach us that love and blood and sex and power and God, they're all together. You can't separate these things. And so she's red like blood with red teeth, but she's so beautiful. I mean, she's beautiful like beyond. She's the most beautiful. Sundari means the most beautiful in all the world. They say she's got giant voluptuous breasts. She's got big thighs, and she has a lovely, they even say lovely trail of hair going down her low belly. So if you got hair, if you got thighs, she's your goddess. She's awesome like that. And she almost looks wet. That's how like luscious she is. She's shiny, like she's almost slippery, juicy. See, juicy. So she's very like Beyonce. I always think of her like Beyonce. Imagine like that moment in Coachella when Beyonce steps on the stage for the first time. That's when Lalita appears. So I'm going to just see if I missed anything. I don't think so. So, oh, this is one thing that's sort of the whole of creation was offered to that fire. So not only did they throw in the flowers and chant the mantras, in the end, they ended up having to offer the whole entire world to that fire. So the world was destroyed to create this goddess. The world had to be destroyed in order to write a new story, to defeat the demon, to channel this goddess energy into the world. They had to offer everything. And so the goddess steps out of the fire. The world is recreated again. And she looks around, right? And so all the gods, they're all like big cartoon heart eyes and tongues hanging out. And she's looking at them all, and she sees Shiva, and she's like, you're the one I need to talk to. She marches over to Shiva and she dubs him. She says, you now are Kameshwara and I am Kameshwari, the emperor of love. So here's this guy who's like, I don't want anything to do with love. I'm going to stuff that desire down so deep that I don't feel it at all. I think I don't feel it, right? What happens when you stuff a desire down? Doesn't it like come out sideways in every which way? So she's telling him, no, you need to honor this desire. And to teach you that, I'm going to call you the emperor of love. And so he becomes the emperor, she the empress of love, of passion, of longing, of desire. And then she goes off and she's going to go defeat this demon, right? And so she's got a whole army of Shaktas, Shakta goddesses. And so she and her army of Shaktas, they start to fight Banda and all of his goons and demons. And the battle rages and rages. And it's really an amazing story. If you want to look deeper into the story, they say that from the goddess's 10 fingernails come the 10 incarnations of Vishnu. Like, for example, Banda the demon, he creates all these other demons. So he creates the demon Ravana. And from one of her fingernails, Lalita creates Ram to defeat Ravana. And so all of the stories that you may have heard in the yoga tradition about the gods battling the demons, they all happen during this battle. So every time Banda sends a demon, she uses one of her fingernails to create a god to go and defeat that demon. And so Banda's getting really frustrated. He's like, we're not winning. This is really, and actually at first when he hears that the goddess is coming for him, he laughs. His generals say, oh, there's this goddess. She's coming to get you. Her name is Lalita. And he laughs and he says, she'll be about as effective as her name. Playful, right? So don't knock the playful, joyous ones. And so the battle's raging. And finally Banda's like, I'm going to get them. He gets his celestial architect to build a yantra. Right? A yantra is a sacred geometric shape imbued with different sort of spiritual qualities. And so they build this yantra that they put a curse on it. And so the curse on the yantra is that anyone who comes near it automatically loses all will to fight. And they throw this yantra, they toss it into the camp of the Shaktas, of the goddesses. And all of a sudden, all the goddesses are like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. They're like, I want to get my hair cut. Does that sound familiar? I want to get my hair cut. I want to do my nails. Why do we have to be the ones who fight this fight? Why do we have to be the ones who are inconvenienced and uncomfortable? I just want it to go back to the way it was, and I want to take a nap. But luckily, two of Lalita's best friends, their spiritual practice was so entrenched. It was so much a part of them that the curse had no effect on them. And so they go run to the goddess. They go run to Lalita and they're panicking. They're like, oh my God, and there's this thing. And all the goddesses are like laying down and taking naps and they don't want to fight. And what do we do? What do we do? And Lalita, she never panics. She's always so cool and collected. She starts to giggle and then she laughs. She lets out a laugh that is so loud, so joyful. It rings across the cosmos. And I bet a lot of you have heard about Ganesha, right? Of course, you all know who Ganesha is. And I bet a lot of you also know the story about how Ganesh got his elephant head. But I'm going to tell you a totally different story about the birth of Ganesha, right? So Lalita, she's laughing, right? Because all the goddesses are cursed now. Her friends are panicking. she laughs, and her laugh creates a vibration that starts to radiate through the cosmos and the stars, and it starts to radiate and vibrate, and all of a sudden up in the sky the vibration condenses, and there's Ganesh. He was born from Lalita's laughter, and they say that's how he came to be. And so Ganesh, right away, he's the god of wisdom. So he looks down, he sees everything that's happening, he gets it right away. He goes and uses his tusk to smash the cursed yantra, which is the why he's got, if you ever see Ganesh, he's got one broken tusk and one long one. So the broken one is from smashing the yantra. And then he and his army, he's got a whole army of elephants, that they quickly beat the army of Banda. So now all that's left is Banda the demon and Lalita the goddess, and they gotta go one-on-one. And Banda takes what he thinks is his strongest weapon, and it's forgetfulness, it's ignorance, right? It's like everything we see out there in the world, that pains us, of people not remembering their nobility, their best selves, their Buddha nature, and all of that forgetfulness, and just like assholeness. I don't know what else to call it. He throws that at her. It's like a missile. And she picks up, like with one pinky, she picks up her missile of unconditional divine love, tosses it at him. The missiles smash together. Banda is destroyed. He's right underneath it when it happens. He's blown to bits. And all is well with the world, of course, after that. But we still have the issue of Kama, who is the god of love, right? And he's the one whose ashes became Banda. So now Banda's nothing but a pile of ashes again. And his wife, Kama's wife, Rati, is there. And she's like, look, my husband, come on. This is like, you got to bring my husband back. And so Lalita does. She says a mantra that conjures up all the air run around the pile of dust, and it starts to reform into a man, and it becomes Kama again. And Lalita tells Kama that you must keep shooting your flower arrows into people's hearts, and you must fill the world with pleasure, that we cannot ever forget to consider pleasure as our birthright, and desire and longing and all of that, not to stuff it down. So big story, right? That's the story. And I'm going to pause there and just check in with you all and see if there's any questions or thoughts about that story. And of course, that's just one version of the story. There's other ones, but I like that one. Anybody? No, you're so quiet today.
I can say something.
Yeah, go for it, Samantha.
I was just thinking, I was writing down as you were telling it, sort of the story on a individual level, thinking about how you said all the gods are doing stupid things, and I thought, isn't that the way of our masculine? Like when we got so busy before this pandemic that we were just lost in doing, and then we'd make mistakes. And I love that when you sit back in the feminine or the intuition or the flow, it'll either correct itself, or if you're there in the first place, you might not make those unconscious mistakes when you're letting the doing lead rather than the being.
Yeah, it's like yin and yang, right? It's like when we're nothing but yang, then we get so out of balance and we make problems everywhere. And it's not even a matter of like masculine, feminine. We use those words, but it's just, right? It's just energy.
Yeah.
And yeah, but I wish we had better names. And I hate, by the way, and I've said this, some of you, I hate that it's such a binary thing, this Hindu mythology. It's old and outdated and conservative, and we have nothing better yet to like frame it as far as masculine, feminine. So I'm just throwing that out there, that's like, I don't like that, but that's what we got to work with. But yeah, it's like when we can fall back, like kind of the yin is like comfort, slowness, cocoon. The yin is like in Taoism, like going with the flow, being like water. And when we like effort, when we go against the flow and we push and we strive and we're material and consumerist, like we make problems. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, Lacey.
Hi.
Hi.
Is my mic unmuted? Okay. I'm still learning all the technology of Zoom here. No, I love the idea of, first off, the Shaktas and this badass group of women together. Like, that visual was really cool, and it was the first time I really heard you like use that word as a like collective of all these like awesome bitches. But I love Lalita because the part where you talk about desire, I think as yogis in this yogi culture that we constantly are being told not to honor that at all, or that it's just wrong. You know, that it's materialistic or Maya or this illusion of us like wanting these things. But talking about, you know, these goddesses in all of the mythology, it's sort of like, this is what that looks like, but not letting it like completely control your life, but just, it's okay to have pieces of that, you know, and that's a human part of us, and that just loving our pleasures and desires and all of this, but what is it, I guess just finding that balance or whatever, and that when it takes us too far one way to like kind of recenter and come back, you know?
Yeah, it's like desire can veer into obsession really easily. Like, if I've ever been obsessed with somebody, like, oh, this person, like, I will not be happy unless this person loves me, or thing, you know. But that's totally at the heart of what she is about pleasure and desire, and how much we deserve that, which is really hard for us. Does anyone now? So there are kind of two ways I wanted to go with this idea of Lalita, like two things. You know, someone asked me on Facebook yesterday, she's like, you know, I looked up this goddess, and to me, it's like, it just says she's all about sexuality, and that just doesn't seem that interesting to me. And I was like, yeah, I get that. If you look her up, you don't find much information. But where I wanted to go with this was two different sort of pathways. And one was that idea of pleasure as our right to enjoy things. And I'm going to bring up a lot of the work of Adrienne Marie Brown. Does anyone know her? She wrote Pleasure Activism. She's brilliant. And so that's one sort of pathway. And then the other pathway is about that idea of living in the place where we can be here. This is based on the work of Esther Perel. Anybody like her? Esther Perel? Yeah, she's amazing. So she's a sex therapist, and she talks a lot about, especially as women, but as humans, that we want desire. We want freedom, right? We want novelty. We want what's dangerous and unknown. Like, doesn't that all make you like, yeah? But then we also want home, dependability, stability, reliability, comfort, right? Do you all have those things? Do you find yourself like that? To me, this is like the torture of my life. That I want both of those things at once. And how do we do that? How do we be sexy and vivacious and playful, right? But also like queenly and executive and holy, and like all these things that seem like they're opposites. Can we blend them? And that's the teaching of Lalita, is how to, she is the power to carry us beyond the mundane, to make the mundane sexy. And that's what Esther Perel says. And I highly recommend, if podcasts again, you can go on your podcast app, just put in her name. She comes up a million times. She's fucking brilliant. And she talks about that, how like, this is the conundrum of being human. And what we have to do is find some way to infuse the mundane with the sexy and the wild and the sacred, to like bring them together, because otherwise we're always going to be torn and bouncing between the two. So that's one thing, that she's like, she's a queen, but she's so playful. Like, can a woman, we often think of a woman as, I'll type her name in the chat box here. She is Esther, I think she's Belgian maybe, Esther Perel. She has an amazing podcast where she does therapy with couples. And you are like a fly in the wall, and you listen to this sex therapy, and it is, and you always think like, oh, this won't be relatable, this show. And then everything every person says, you're like, oh God, yes, it's so relatable. So she's wonderful. So so she says, you know, that's really what it is. And I think about like women, like we're either I think about what happened to Hillary Clinton, right? That like so many women turned on her and said she's a bitch because she was powerful, or she like they would mock her and her pantsuits. Like she could never be beautiful or sexy or anything like soft because she was powerful. And like women get put, and if you're gorgeous, then you're probably a slut, right? Or you're like, you're dumb, or like you can't, it's so part of our society to separate those things with women, that you can't be both executive and powerful and sexy and playful. And Lalita's like, oh no, you can be all of that and then some, and you can love it. You can be all that, and you can just like totally take so much joy in all of it. And then the other aspect is about pleasure. Oh, hi, sweetie. Teenager. He always wakes up when we're talking about sex. Come here, get up. He's going back up. So the other thing is this idea. So pleasure activism. This is what Adrienne Marie Brown talks about. She says that pleasure activism is, I'm going to read you actually exactly what she says: making justice and liberation the most pleasurable experience we can have. Learning that pleasure gets lost under the weight of oppression. Oh, isn't that so amazing? And it's so true, right? And she was talking about like being a social activist and a justice warrior, and like going to meetings and being part of groups. And there was always this feeling of like heaviness, and like people who are oppressed, people who have been marginalized. It's like the world sort of tells them like, you don't deserve pleasure. There's such a darkness, a heaviness about it. And she's saying, no, that's actually the way we're going to do this. That pleasure is the way we reclaim our power, that this is our birthright. But we've been taught by the world that radical pleasure, whether it's sexual or enjoying food, so it's not just sex we're talking about. It's like, can you enjoy food? You know, like I have a lifelong history of eating disorder because I can't enjoy food. Sometimes I see like even an image of food on a billboard and I cry, because I've been taught from a young age, like, it's scary. Like you should be thin and food makes you fat, you know? And it's like, can we just enjoy it? It's sensual, it's beautiful. And you know, that these things like food and like when you're having a conversation with someone that like, you know, those conversations where you're just like your spirits connect, like a soul, it's like the soulmate. There's no better word for it. You know, that kind of like to take pleasure in that is so important, you know, and whether the work is spiritual activism or social justice or our own spiritual path, our own work of just waking up in the world, is it pleasurable? You know, and like Shiva in this story felt like, oh, if I'm going to be a yogi, it's got to be really serious work. And, you know, we see that all the time, like that, you know, the spiritual work is like, you can't make jokes. It's got to be like hardcore, real deal, or else you're not going to be enlightened. You know, that, and yeah, speak up, please, anybody, if you want to say anything.
Going, like touching on the same, thing. I think that when I first met you, I remember feeling like, oh, I can be all of these things at once. Like when I first started learning more about, you know, yoga and digging deeper into a spiritual practice, I was kind of like, how can I do all this, but I work in like the beauty industry and telling people like, you need to have the best eyebrows and the best lashes, and I have my nails done, and yet I want to like talk about Krishna and goddesses and all of these things and being holy. And I was like, how can I do this? And you just like looked at me and told me, like, I don't even remember what goddess it was. I want to say it was Lalita, about, you know, being curvilicious and like all of these things and being like Beyonce, and that it was okay to do that. And I was like, what? And that's when I started following you forever. But I think that I love this just because all of what you're saying is I constantly feel this struggle of like duality and back and forth and back and forth. Like, what is my identity and how can I be both of these things? And in the mythology, you always say too that like it's all you. You know, like there's pieces where you're just like, oh, I can never do that, or look at that demon, what a dick. But then like a part of you has a piece of that too, and it's okay to kind of like honor it all, I guess.
Yeah, the light and the shadow and everything. It's like it's just all part of it. I
Yeah.
wanted to say one other thing about this pleasure activism, and this is coming straight from Adrienne Marie Brown. I'll type her name too in the chat box, and so you could look up. She's got a couple of books, but the one I'm talking about is Pleasure Activism, and she's Adrienne Marie Brown. And she was talking about, she talked about her nephew, her little nephew, who was, I don't know, probably like 4 or 5 or something, and he just discovered his penis, and like how like he was so delighted because it's like, oh, like it felt really good. Like as children, we know instinctively that touching our bodies feels good, right? And like you see little kids do it all the time, and then what happens though? The parents are like, stop that. You know. And then and she said, you know, and she said he did that like it was all he wanted to do for like 2 years because it feels so good. And then she said, you know, we're sort of like, I also love Shiva's role in this story, how he's giving us this really intense example, bypassing totally how when we're choosing to exist in a spiritually bypassing world, we're unable to heal totally or open to any real solutions. Yeah, Shiva's like, stuff it down, bypass it. I'm going to be a yogi. And then not only do you not heal, but you create more problems, because anything you try to stuff down, it's going to come out worse in some other direction. And so he tries to stuff it down, and it becomes this giant demon that's going to destroy the world. Right. And so going back to the kids, so she said, you know, we get the message when we're young that it's bad. Right? We get the message like, stop doing that. That's not socially acceptable. That's not right. You're gonna like, you know, your hands are gonna freeze that way, or like whatever. Like somebody, she gave one example. Please to tell her you're gonna get hair on your hand if you kept doing that.
Going blind,
right? We've all heard those things. We get the message that this thing that makes you feel so good right now is not okay, and then that gets sort of imprinted on us from childhood. It's not okay. Your pleasure is not okay. Especially as women, it's all about men's pleasure, right? And like, it's about performing. And we learn like, okay, this is how I should perform to you know, pleasure should look like this. But we're never given the freedom or the right to just take total delight in our own pleasure. And so that's part of what Lalita is. Like, yeah, she's sort of the goddess of sexuality, but it's about reclaiming in your system, like feeling that so deeply that I deserve the full pleasure of life. And then it's actually that full pleasure of life that is going to move things forward.
So I was having this conversation recently with someone. So I became an executive really young, like comparatively.
Yeah.
On myself for around a decade in boardrooms. I was the only woman.
Wow.
Like just in so many situations. And I used to talk. So now I mentor a lot of young female leaders. And the conversation that comes up a lot is that sexuality and pleasure are weaponized against us. Mm-hmm. When somebody feels threatened by us, they will they would start a rumor that I was sleeping with someone. And like, that's why I was getting ahead. And this isn't a personal story, but it's more like, it just brings me back to having to remind myself so often that like, you cannot shame me because I'm a sexual person. Like having conversations with young women now that are coming up in leadership, because, you know, changing a society, and especially men in a boardroom, right, that are in their 60s, that, you know, I don't expect to change them, and I don't I refuse to take on their own emotional journey to maturity. So instead, coming back when, you know, comments are made where they'll compliment each other for sexual conquest and then weaponize it against a woman in the same room. And coming back and saying, you cannot attack me because I'm a sexual person, because I like pleasure, because I am young. And, you know, when you're 25, right? And saying, yes, I am young and I am beautiful and I have a lot of fun and I'm also just as smart and just as good at my job as you are. And like owning that. And it almost feels, I was having a conversation the other day about sometimes you feel like you have to be even bigger than everybody else in the room to compensate. Almost. Yeah. Like I have to show up even bigger, like to say that like I can have the balance, but I have to like compensate almost sometimes. And it's that like reminder to myself that like I have just every right to have pleasure and be powerful that you do in this room.
So. 1,000%. Oh my God, that's so good. And it's like, it's a huge ship to turn around because everything in our culture is based on what is the white man's pleasure, right? It's like our whole system is oriented around what pleasures the white man, slightly what pleasures the white woman, but mostly that, you know? And so we really have to like reteach people and be willing for people to look at you like a slut or whatever they want to say about it. But like we deserve, you'll love this book, that Pleasure Activism. She's got all these amazing practices you can do like with your own body and just like to how to really stand in that power that merges desire and beauty and grace and sexuality with power and strength and smarts. Yeah. Anybody else? What else do you have to say?
Kelly, I think, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting, not just in this story of Lalita, but in some of the other stories like Georgia, that the demons dismiss the female power. Like, oh yeah, no, like it's only men or gods that can defeat me. And it's always the female who comes in and kind of saves the day. And I love that about the goddess stories. It's like, we've all as women had that, like people dismiss us like, oh, what do you know? And I'm sure all of us have had the experience of like, now I have to fix it after you've made a mess of it.
Right. First they mansplain you.
Exactly.
And then you have to go clean up the mess. And so many of the stories, like the story of Saraswati, Brahma creates the world, he makes a mess, and then Saraswati has to come and clean it all up. And like, it happens so often. Yeah. But then they always sort of like marry the woman. Like then she gets married to Shiva, right? And that's the end of the story, is that they marry her so she can be a wife, because she's like, yes, she's wild, but she has to be a wife too, which is so stupid. So we need to rewrite all these stories where they get to be not married if they don't want to be. Although Lalita does say, she says to Shiva, I will marry you, but only if you accept my independence. So she is one of the rare goddesses that really claims that and says, you don't own me, which is pretty great.
We need you to rewrite the stories, Kelly.
I know, and that's always been my mission, and I just don't, I tell them, so they're all like, you know, here they are, I just wrote it just now. And I'll put it on the website someday and it'll be there. Anybody else have any last thoughts here? I'm trying to see if I missed anything.
I feel like I'm talking so much today, but almost playing on the other side of honoring your sexuality. I feel sometimes like this like guilt of doing that. Like when I post or like put anything online, because I'm like, or even just like wear a sexy outfit outside, it's almost like I feel like I have to over explain myself because I want to be sexy in that moment. Totally. You know, or when even my own mind of how I look at other women, sometimes it's like reconditioning my thoughts when I see someone like being sexy. I'm like, oh, who does she think she is? And then I'm like, wait, don't, like, what am I doing? I don't know her story or any of those things. But it's almost like I want to be seen for more than that. So it's kind of like, again, honoring and just like saying fuck it and just be what I want to be in that moment. But then it's like you can recondition your own thoughts, but still I have that little bit of like insecurity of what everybody else is going to think out there. Like, I'm a mom, I'm a business owner, I'm all of these things. So why am I walking outside in booty shorts? You know what I mean? So I think that it's so hard to kind of like not let all that shit filter into your head and still honor your sexuality, but not only be seen for that, you know. And talking, or the other woman that was on here, like talking about being in like a business setting and all of this, and I love that, and it sounds so powerful and amazing, but I'm just like, I was almost like cringing and being like, if I was in a room full of men, I wouldn't feel comfortable even wearing a skirt, you know, or like things like that, where it's like kind of hard, where there's been moments where I do try to like hide that or feel like guilty of it, you know. I don't know, just playing off of that. I'm like the devil, not the devil's advocate side, but the other piece of it. And both of them I can relate to, you know, wanting to be like, hey, I'm this, like, accept it and love it. But at the same time, feeling like I might be feeling that way, but all of these men in this room are just seeing me for that. And I'm like covering that up because of that, you know?
Well, there's a definite, like, I want to protect myself from them, you know, right? That's sort of part of it. It's like, there's a danger. Those men are dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that part of it is that like a natural instinct to protect yourself by covering up more and not showing your sexuality, which is sad. But then the other thing is, like, we have been raised, that's just it, that message that our sexuality is not okay is just like in our bones.
Yeah.
And it's going to take many generations, I think, to change that. Yeah. Thank you. What else? I guess that's about it. So next week, did anybody else want to talk? No? Oh, somebody asked about whether the stories were written by men or women. That's a really good question. And I don't know exactly. Definitely in the later years, they were written by men. But what happened in the culture, the myth culture of India, is that South India was goddess-centered. South India is lush and fertile and hot and sexy, right? It's like, of course, they're going to have strong mother goddesses that come from like the earth and the flowers. And then from like the plains of Afghanistan and across Mongolia and through North India came warrior men, conquerors, basically, the Aryan invaders. And they brought with them male. This is like condensing a whole lot of history into 1 minute, but they brought with them a culture of male sky gods. And they come down from the north, meeting this culture of goddess, of like earth goddess culture. And they had weapons and they were stronger. And they defeated these people. And they wrote new stories. That's why they wrote the story about Kali and Shiva getting into a dance contest, because they needed a way to put Kali down. They needed a way to make the goddess subservient to the god. And so the stories in the beginning may have some been written by women, we don't know, but certainly by like 1000 AD, the stories were rewritten by men to always make the woman subservient. And so now we must rewrite the stories, right? Or at least retell them and reframe them and give the woman back her power. I love our Woman Goddess Wednesdays. Thank you. I'm going to unmute you all, and anything else that you want to say, please do. And next week we will keep going for anyone who wants to participate, and we'll do, I think we've done 5 of the 10 Mahavidyas so far, so we got 5 more to go. So I think maybe we'll do 2 or 3 of them next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'll hang around if anybody has any questions or anything.
I just had like a really sweet thought of like how in the story when she laughs and sends out the vibration, I'm like, all of us here are kind of the manifestations of that vibration. And right as we like take fold and like receive this wisdom, we are like putting into form knowledge that's going to change the world. So
yeah, definitely. Thank you for doing it with me. Whoa. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
And if you want the recording later, let me know, and I'll post on my Instagram stories those poems and things